Bismillah. Welcome to the new season of our podcast on the teachings and history of Bahaísm, brought by Mr. Waḥīd Azal and Keyvān Yaḥyāʿī. How are you, Mr. Azal?
Bismillah, I'm very well. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Mr. Azal, first of all, could you please summarize what happened to you, during the past months since we stopped making the podcast up to this moment, right up to this moment that we are talking? Could you just
Sure.
give us a summary of whatever happened to you? Because that's tragic, and I believe anybody's entitled to get to know of it. Please.
Well, most people already know because of the eulogies and some of the self-recordings that I put on the page. But my wife passed away on the 12th of March this year, very, very unexpectedly. She was only 51 years old, was in perfect health, and she had a history of asthma but had cured herself of it. She had no episodes, no asthmatic episodes in about 8 years. Never had one since I knew her. And she passed away. And then during the week that she passed away, the authorities here in Berlin acted very, very strangely throughout the course of the week. I've kind of detailed some of the weird things that happened. But then they subsequently issued a cause of death that doesn't actually make any sense. Both with her with the established medical record of my late wife, and also because the cause of death that they've specified is extremely general. Now, under German law, I am entitled, after a 6-week period, to the detailed records of the post-mortem that was conducted by medical authorities. And I have been writing to the office of the district attorney of Berlin, who is responsible for this, and they have not even acknowledged any of my letters, although I have one individual who has called them on my behalf on several occasions and has even established that that there is a team within the DA's office that even received my letter. But time keeps going by and I don't hear anything from these people. They have not even acknowledged reception of my letter. And given the discrepancy between what the police stated as being the cause of death and the fact that the district attorney is acting extremely strange by not even responding to my legal requests for a copy of the entire record of the post-mortem. This is raising a lot of flags, both with myself and also a lot of people around me.
Mr. Azal, has the official report so far unleashed and made accessible to you?
No, they haven't made. They haven't made any. The only thing that we got, and we had to get this ourselves from what they call the German term for it is quite long, but it's like a institute that deals both with the hospital and also the state medical authorities that keeps records. The police itself did not offer to send me a document with their cause of death, with what they had determined or what they had been told by the medical authorities about the cause of death. I had to go and get that through the bureaucracy myself. And then once I got this, I went to our regular GP here in Berlin, and this GP thinks that this is an impossible. That what the police are claiming as the cause of death is number one, way too general, and also doesn't make any sense based on the examinations that he had made in September of last year.
Right. So you have my sincere condolences, Mr. Azal, for your loss. as you know, we'll be talking about the infiltration of the Baha'is, obviously Haifan Baha'is, in the structure of the current regime in Iran, Islamic Republic. And I would like to sketch, the pillar of our discussion to that direction. Because more eliminating than pointing an accusing finger at the motives of the Baha'is is to ask why they attempted to regulate and order behavior of its members. The answer might lie in a very basic identity problem. But the thing is, group selection is a term used to describe the operation of, evolutionary forces on closely knit or, interbreeding groups of people, not just individuals. It was recognized by someone like Charles Darwin as an important factor in the emergence of social behavior. Okay, in the light of the social behavior, as anyone with a passing knowledge of, litigation knows, discussing any alleged Baha'i conspiracy, on the internet is very risky. Is that true? It's very risky because everything might be targeted as an attempt against Baha'is. But the fact behind the story of the infiltration of the Baha'is, in the structure of the Islamic Republic, demonstrates that the scheme was far beyond the largest successful infiltration of a cult into a government. What's your take on?
Well, where do we begin? I mean, I think in one sense we have to go back to the part 2 of the podcast that we made on the Baha'i Mafia and talk about the parallel organizations that exist in the Baha'i milieu. Because when we're talking about the infiltration of the Islamic Republic of Iran by the Baha'is, we're not talking about the infiltration of like the lay organization. We're not talking about people at the very bottom rung. We're talking about forces that can be only characterized in the context of a mafia. Now, the Islamic Republic of Iran, for all of its claims, as everybody knows, was experiences, is a corrupt regime, and it has been that way, unfortunately. I would probably say from the very beginning. Nevertheless,
from its conception right up to the
beginning. What?
But sorry, Mr. Azal, sorry to interrupt you, because forget communists to the party. The guerrilla groups. Nobody has ever launched a great espionage mission with Islamic Republic greater and more successful than the Baha'is.
Depending on who you talk to, and there's a couple of very credible scholars that have come up out of Iran in the last 30, 40 years. And whereas some people in the West might classify these individuals as being conspiracy theorists, yet they engage in very meticulous historical scholarship with evidence. And there are people that have contextualized it in the context that when we are talking about what happened over the last 40 years, you have to, on one level, you have to overlook the actual course of events and look at the power structure that was behind regimes, and that wasn't necessarily either the monarchy or even the Islamic Republic. We have to talk about the economic mafia of Iran. And before the revolution, there used to be this cliche that they used to talk about the Hazar family, the 1,000 families, or something to that effect. This is a fact, and this has been a fact in Iran for a very long time. These people, are whether you're talking about some of the old structures of the Khan, structures, the overlords, the provincial overlords, that well-moneyed, etc. Whether you're talking about the Bazaris, whether you're talking about other elements of the economic mafia. And from what I have observed about the Islamic Republic of Iran is that for all the tumultuousness and all the political explosion that happened in Iran in 1978 and 79, that even throughout the course of the last 40 years, that the regime did not really succeed in removing the economic mafia. And we begin to see evidence of this very clearly, especially during the presidency of Hāshemī Rafsanjānī, where these people literally come back into the limelight again, although many of these historians claim that they were there the whole time. So for all of its own brutality and all of its own violence, etc., the Islamic Republic of Iran appears to have been, from the very beginning, impotent in the face of this economic mafia. Now, we spoke in that second podcast about the Baha'i Mafia, about the case of Habīb Sābet and his secret trips to Iran, and the disappearance of the First National Assembly, etc. Now, Habīb Sābet arguably was a very important leading component of the Iranian economic mafia of the Pahlavi period, especially the Pahlavi period from after the coup d'etat of 1953. This gentleman had a vast array of networks within Iran, beyond just the Baha'i community. He owned several companies, as did his son, and it appears from all the information that has been gleaned is that the reason why the First National Spiritual Assembly disappeared in 1979 is because they were planning to whistleblow on the activities of Habīb Sābet within Iran after the revolution. They were also going to whistleblow on the fact that a leading member of the Revolutionary Council, namely Mohammad Javād-Bāhonar, was Habīb Sābet's main contact. Now we are also learning that there are actual interrogation transcripts by one of the members of the Second National Spiritual Assembly of Iran that was executed. And this is the transcripts of the interrogation of Zhinous Maḥmoudī, who apparently had confessed to our interrogators that about the goings on that this Second National Spiritual Assembly and Zhinous Maḥmoudī personally knew about the activities of Habīb Sābet.
Why didn't Zhinous Maḥmoudī stand the trial all along?
And that is the question that when they had that televised trial, that the BBC has subsequently basically put up a redacted version online claiming to be the entire trial. It's very conspicuous that Mrs. Zhinous Maḥmoudī is not present in that assemblage of people. Now, some people will claim this was the judge and the prosecutor, this was a male-only court. But as we know, in the revolutionary courts of the Islamic Republic, they never make a distinction between women and men. So that argument goes out of the window right there. But that is the question. That is a sore thumb, and that is what invalidates many of the claims that the Baha'is and their allies in the West have made about this trial. Is that
and what's your resources? Would have to say about this suspicious case?
Well, this is also what they're saying. They're saying that there are interrogation transcripts of Zhinous Maḥmoudī, where she actually lays out what we have been saying about the activities of Habīb Sābet and the collusion of Habīb Sābet with Mohammad Javād-Bāhonar. Now, what's quite interesting is that this trial of the second NSA occurs around exactly the same time where you had the bombings, where leading members of the Islamic Republican Party, Mr. Raja'i, Bāhonar himself, died in an explosion, right? And whereas the regime in Iran has blamed this event on the MEK, people like Bani Sadr, the first president of the Islamic Republic, who actually fled Iran during this time, has claimed repeatedly on the record that this was an inside job, that this whole event occurred because of a massive power struggle that had erupted between forces personally loyal to Ayatollah Khomeini and people like Beheshti, Raja'i, Bāhonar, etc., that despite appearances were trying to carve out their own power within the IRI. Now, what is especially interesting here is that these people were arrested almost simultaneously to that event. And as we now know, Bāhonar was a leading ally of Habīb Sābet. And there were other Ayatollahs in that Kerman area who were also in on it, as it were, on what was going on between Bāhonar and Sābet. So this right here, right at the beginning, in the very first years of the Islamic Republic of Iran, shows that regardless of what the Baha'is have claimed to international human rights organizations and the narratives that they have spun, that the Baha'i mafia has always been in some way in contact with the leading establishment figures, of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Right, because Mr. Azal, I believe Mrs. Mahmoud's husband, Mr. Mahmoudi, was among the members of the first National Spiritual Assembly who were all executed,
That's right.
Hijacked and executed. That's right. Because, having almost nearly gotten away with that, there is no way, to argue that what Habīb Sābet did, specifically his collusion with Mohammad Javād-Bāhonar, is anything but a resounding victory, for the universal house of justice.
Absolutely, because what happened is that they put a massive lid on a scandal that, if it had gotten out, would have ripped up the international Baha'i community.
And are you suggesting that Mrs. Zhinous Maḥmoudī was fully aware of that?
This is what our contacts...
She was going to whistleblow?
Well, this is what our contacts in Iran say, that the interrogation transcripts that they had, what they call the Bozjui records. This is what it shows, that this woman was completely in the know. She knew what had happened and had several times underscored this whole event and the disappearance of the previous NSA of Iran, and that she had, explicitly fingered Bāhonar. So this means that at least Zhinous Maḥmoudī, maybe not the other individuals, or we don't know, but she at least was completely in the know about the things that had been going on in Iran between Sābet and Bāhonar.
As it's obvious that the infiltration of the Baha'is, in both of the governments, I mean Pahlavi dynasty as well as Islamic Republic of Iran, began innocently, perhaps, dishonestly, in effect, but innocently enough. But it soon, devolved into what some call an outright conspiracy against the governments, in both of the cases.
Yes.
Agree?
Well, I mean, this is the speculation that the internal factional war within the Pahlavi regime, which was, one leading faction was the Sangasari Baha'i faction that was led by Ayādi and was represented by people like Parvīz Sābetī, and some of these other Iranian courtiers. Habīb Sābet would have been in this faction. That was one leading faction. The other one was, people like Alam, Asadullah Alam, etc. That this conflict within the power structures of the Pahlavi regime was instrumental in bringing forward the explosion of Iran into outright revolution, and the collapse of the Pahlavi regime. But what appears to be the case is that maybe the faces change from one regime to another, but this power structure that I referenced before, the economic mafia of Iran, they were left untouched, and they were left untouched because these people could afford protection from even the revolutionary turmoil of the time, and because most of these people had been in the shadows to begin with during the Pahlavi regime, there was not that much justification for revolutionary forces to target them. And also some people, there was, according to, Abdullah Shahbazi, for instance, there was a lot of people, a lot of these individuals, especially the Sangha studies, who once, you know, the regime changed, they threw away their ties and Western attire and put on beards and started dressing up as Islamists, but were really Baha'is. And they began to infiltrate the bureaucracy of the new system in a very speedy fashion. Some of these people begin to infiltrate the seminaries. Like, for instance, this individual that is in Tehran, this Ayātollāh Masoumī-Tehrānī, who's an extremely dubious individual, may be one of these people, that this guy was one of the Baha'is that all along...
He's not even an Ayatollah, you know.
Well, you know, we don't know what to believe. I mean, you know, my contacts in the Qom have said many times that they don't even know who this guy is. He claims that he has a, you know, that he studied under, you know, several of these Ayatollahs who have now passed away. No one remembers him, seems to remember him under that name. But what I find very quaint is that within the media structure of Iran, no one has ever attacked this guy and claimed that he's not an Ayatollah. He has not been, you know, he has been called to the judiciary to answer charges about his political activism, but he has never actually had to answer any charges about any fraudulent misrepresentations about his clerical rank. And I find this very strange. You know, I find that extremely strange, because this is one of the first things that one would expect that the Iranian judiciary or the organs of the Islamic Republic would do, is to, you know, basically expose this guy as a fraud and not a real Ayatollah. But they have not done that. And this is where
you have, Mr. Azal, you have time and again mentioned three names, prominent figures, you know, in the Pahlavi regime, you know, throughout the contemporary history, namely Abdul Karim Ayyadi or Hojjat'ul Yazdani, and you know, Parvīz Sābetī.
Yes.
The last one, Parvīz Sābetī, I believe he was coming from Sangisar, right?
Yes, yes.
In the 70s, in particular, you know, actually the Savak office used its considerable resources, you know, to launch a sort of conspiracy that involved infiltrating, you know, multiple, you know, guerrilla groups and, you know, resistances like Mujahideen Khalq or, you know, Fadā'iyan Khalq, or even to the party. And I believe they succeeded in setting up Dr. Shariati, you know.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
One of the, you know, perhaps the largest and greatest issues that's never been explained and fully accounted up to this moment. What happened to Dr. Shariati?
Well, this is the thing, we don't know. But he, you know, when he went to Southampton from France in 1977, he just suddenly goes to a friend's house. He spends the night with them, and the next morning, apparently, when they went to wake him up, he had fallen out of bed and had a massive heart attack and died. And then, you know, several people, including amongst them being Abdul Karim Surush, had driven all the way from London to Southampton and you know, to be with this family of Shariati's, you know, this friend of the family, the Shariati family. And it's all very strange what happened to Dr. Shariati. And I mean, his own family, Dr. Shariati's family, does not believe, especially his daughters, they don't believe that their father's death was a natural death. Now, one thing that we know, that you know, that some Bayanis know at least, is that the Shariati family, beginning with Mohammad-Taqī Shariati, were actually secret Azalī Bābīs. They were secret Bayanis.
That's right.
And that through the rhetoric of revolutionary Islam, they were actually promoting the doctrines of the Bayan. And with Ali Shariati personally, this would have been, you know, he was contextualizing his ideology in the format of it, sort of a, you know, reading Marxism and also the French existential philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and even Albert Camus, etc. into this reinterpretation.
His father, Mohammad-Taqī Shariti, as you mentioned, also abandoned,
his father, Mohammad-Taqī Shariti, had, he came from a long line clerical family, and had gone through the seminary training to its completion. But once he came out, like even Ahmad Kasravi did, but Ali Shariati's father, took off the abba, took off the amam, the turban, shaved his face throughout his whole life, and became one of the faces of a modernist Islam within Iran throughout pretty much the 20th century until his own passing, just not long after that of his son. But what we do seem to understand is that at some point during the conclusion of his seminary training, Mohammad-Taqī Shariti may have converted to the Bayan. And there's also those letters of correspondence between Ali Shariati and members of the Dawlat-Abadi family.
That's right.
And this is at a period where the
poetry.
Yeah, this is at a period where the Dawlat-Abadi family were still very much involved and active as Bayanis, as the Bayanis of Iran, and everybody knew that at the time. And it appears that the clerical structure within Iran itself, people like Motahari and that whole conclave of individuals that were close to the Ayatollah Khomeini also knew that the Shariati family were not really Orthodox Muslims, that they were actually Bayanis, and that they were pursuing this revolutionary ideology, packaging it with an Islamist kind of, or a revolutionary Islamist kind of packaging, but that once you took the package out, there was the Bayan. And this basically then makes Ali Shariati, as well as his father, as also the architects of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Now, Savak and Parvīz Sābetī especially would have been quite aware of this at the time. And the growing influence of Ali Shariati's thought and his person would have been seen as a serious threat, not just to the regime
because of his widespread, his sufficiently widespread influence. Is that true?
Yeah, his widespread influence and amongst the youth, the fact that he was preaching a Shiism without the clergy.
So it was a gaslighting of the teachings of the primary point, disguised into.
That's a different word. I mean, what he was doing is he was basically Ali Shariati. When you cut to the chase with Ali Shariati, when you also strip Massignon, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus out of Ali Shariati, also strip Karl Marx out of Ali Shariati as well, what you're left with is the Bayan. What you're left is the doctrines of the primal point. And the mullahs of the time understood this very well. And this is one of the reasons why they had the problem with him. And as we both know, is that when Ali Shariati...
They were very upset. Is that true?
They were extreme... Because Ali Shariati, let's face it, Ali Shariati, his lectures at the Hosseiniya Irshad and his writings had pretty much upstaged the Hawza. He had upstaged many times Motahari in debate. He had upstaged, people, even, these figures of associated with the regime itself, like Sayyid Hossein Nasr. He had upstaged the establishment because the kind of Islam that he was pushing was not, it wasn't really the Orthodox Islam of the seminary. These were the ideas of the Bab that Ali Shariati was repackaging in this form and camouflaging in the form that he presented them. And
so that's exactly what I said, because Mr. Motahari frequently used to accuse Ali Shariati of gaslighting the Muslim youth by psychological means into doubting their own Islamic identity, by introducing the teachings of the Bayan.
Yes.
He was extremely upset, about that problem. And you just mentioned Sayyid Hossein Nasr.
Yes.
I believe he was also an arch enemy
Yes.
of Bayanis.
Yes.
I don't know why.
Maybe, well, one can speculate the reason, but I think part of it may have to do with his father's association with the Anjuman al-Khuvat, which was this, kind of a quasi-Masonic Sufi order that was, it was a Darbari, it was a royal court enterprise during both of the Pahlavi Shahs. And several of the individuals within the Anjuman al-Khuvat had personal rivalries with people such as Yahya Dawlatabadi, and the Dawlatabadi family as a whole. So that enmity of Sayyid Hossein Nas towards the Bayani community may emerge from these kind of shadowy occurrences and what have you that was going on during that period of the first Pahlavi Shah, then subsequently during the period of the second Pahlavi Shah. Also, as far as I understand, I've only got this in snippets from here and there, is that Sayyid Hossein Nas' father was a rival to Furuqi, Muhammad Ali Furuqi.
Yes.
And
yes.
Muhammad Ali Furuqi, despite what certain people who don't know anything or who have posted at universities like Princeton, despite what these know-nothings are saying, Muhammad Ali Furuqi was a Bayani.
Yes.
A lifelong Bayani. He was a lifelong Bayani. Now, he may have had other affiliations in addition to this, but throughout his whole life and his whole family were Bayanis. And this is the man that basically helped the first Pahlavi Shah out of Iran and installed the second Pahlavi Shah on his throne. So, these rivalries that existed between the elites of that regime at the time, this is one of the explanations for the enmity of Sayyid Hossein Nas to the Bayani community. But I've also heard different things, people who have asked Sayyid Hossein Nas about, what his views of Azalī Bābīsm versus Bahā'ism is. His responses have generally been more positive towards Azalī Bābīsm, the Bayan, than it has about the Baha'is. Nevertheless, during the period of Ali Shariati, all of these people were well aware of the fact that there was something beyond the Marxism, beyond the existentialism in Ali Shariati. And several of these ulama, and Khomeini particularly himself, had put his finger on this, and this is evidenced by the fact that when Ali Shariati died, he initially was very reluctant to even send a condolence letter, and when asked about it, I think it was either by Mehdi Bazargan or somebody else from Iran, who had called him in Najaf, he had claimed to them that he didn't consider Ali Shariati to be a Muslim. And he never said this. Ayatollah Khomeini never said at that period, even about certain Muslims with radical left-wing tendencies. But with Ali Shariati, he singled them out in that respect. Now, later on, after the revolution, he did this. But the only conclusion that one can reach is that Ayatollah Khomeini knew very well that the Shariati family were not Orthodox Muslims, but that they were Bayanis.
And Mr. Azal, he didn't send any letter, for the death of Mohammad-Taqī Shariati either, right?
Well, I understand that he did actually send a very pro forma letter on both occasions. That he did, after some time, send a pro forma condolence letter to Mohammad-Taqī Shariati
but that's quite
about Ali,
passionate.
and also on the death of Mohammad-Taqī Shariati himself. Now, what's interesting is that a personal friend of the Shariati family in Mashhad is none other than Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran today. That he was very close with this family, considered this family to be personal friends of his, and he was the individual that apparently gave the bad news to Mohammad-Taqī in 1977 after learning about the death of Ali Shariati in Southampton. So this is one of these anomalies where you have the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran today, the Wali Faqih, who was quite close, a close personal friend to two of the leading secular figures and architects of the Islamic Revolution of Iran, which now we know were in fact secret Azalī Bābīs, secret Bayanis. But so was the Ayātollāh Masoumī-Tehrānī, who is a very interesting figure of that period. He was also a very close personal friend to Mohammad-Taqī Shariati and Ali Shariati as well, both.
That's right. Yeah. Mr. Azal, after Sābet had been dismantled, on Bakhtiyar's direct order, among the first orders issued by Parvīz Sābetī was discharging and sweeping and depleting evidence and anything whatsoever related to the activities of Baha'is. Why? Did he really intend to purge anything that might put the Baha'is into danger?
He wanted to disappear all incriminating evidence, but he didn't quite succeed, because people who have actually worked on the Savak files, scholars, historians, people like Leila Chamankha, Abdullah Shahbazi, and a lot of other people have found mountains of evidence in these archives that the Islamic Republic has in its own holdings presently that shows, at least during the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s, that regional Savak offices were keeping very meticulous files on the goings-on of the Baha'i community. But once Parvīz Sābetī reached that position of the deputy director of Savak, one of the primary things that he was doing was to classify all this documentation, to put it away, and where he could to destroy them. And this is quite telling, and it's also this activity of Parvīz Sābetī is proof against the present claim that he has been making and the USJ has been making, that he is not a Baha'i. Well, if he's not a Baha'i, then what interest could he possibly have in trying to classify these documents or disappear them, destroy them altogether?
Exactly.
So this in itself is what we call the tale of the rooster, Dom Khurus, which categorically proves that the interests and the agendas of Parvīz Sābetī were very much with the Baha'i community, and even still are today, despite claims by other people that they are.
Yes, it's still very much ongoing today. And 2 years ago, I was reading a book entitled the Memoirs of Izzat Shahi. Izzat Shahi was, a former member of Mujahideen Khalq, a very robust and resistant person who was beaten up to death, almost to death by Sābet. And he put forward this theory that having infiltrated multiple government agencies, foreign embassies and consulates, along with countless organizations, run by the government, one of the leading figures of the security systems of Islamic Republic, Javād Shahī, in the early 80s, came, and the goal was to purge records they deemed unfavorable to the Baha'is, and prevent new such reports from being generated. That's very weird and bizarre.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
This was going on a lot, but by the same token, there were people within that system that were resisting these efforts, and this is part of the internal establishmentarian war that I referenced at the beginning within the Pahlavi regime itself, that had pitted this Baha'i faction, very powerful Baha'i mafia with ties to the royal court, against other members of that establishment and that regime. And that this whole thing was one of the dynamics that propelled the weakening of the Pahlavi monarchy itself, and the weakening of that system that then led to the revolution of 1978-1979. But let's focus on this. Why has there always been an interest by certain people to disappear certain information about the Baha'is?
That's right.
What is the interest? Isn't this similar to even the activities of the USJ itself in putting the bulk of the Baha'i writings, the writings of Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri, etc., under tight lock and key, not allowing this material to see the light of day, never releasing the original of what they claim to be the original manuscript of Nabil's narrative, the Matali al-Anwar, etc. This is a very common tactic that they want to control information, because obviously this kind of information is extremely incriminating, if it ever, comes to the light of day. And even the surviving Savak archives, from all the feedback that I've gotten from people like Shaman Khaw, Shahbazi, and many others who have looked through these archives of the period, that this information is extremely incriminating. Number one, it's incriminating in the sense of what Savak was recording as to what the Baha'is were up to in terms of economic crimes, etc. in Iran, but also quite telling in that it shows the extent to which Savak itself had infiltrated the Baha'i community of Iran and recruited people within the Baha'i community of Iran. Very prominent individuals within the Baha'i community of Iran. And because of the protection of the royal court and because of the protection of the system itself, this was not seen in a bad way at all by the Baha'i community of Iran at the time. Unless you were at the very bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder, then yeah, there would be a problem. But this continues. See, this continues beyond the revolution. And arguably, one of the best examples of this that many people now in Iran, thankfully, are beginning to see is the career of none other than Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād. There have been questions about this individual for a very long time. I had questions about this individual almost instantaneously after he got into the rank of the first round of the presidential elections in 2005. This was, a real measly mayor of Tehran. All of a sudden, he reaches national status. But who is Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād? Now,
as you know, Mr. Azal, it's been totally confirmed and endorsed by even the government of Israel that he's definitely not a Jew. He's never been a Jew.
He's never been a Jew. His family have never been Jewish. That this whole story was
the case for his ancestors.
Yeah, that this story was deliberate misinformation. God knows who planted it. It probably was by one of his own. But what we know now, and this is from research that has come out of Iran itself by historians who are quite credible, is that Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād's father, his real last name was Saburqiyan. And the Saburqiyan family is part of the network of families from Sangisar in Semnan province. Now, as anybody who knows the history of Sangisar will tell you, this is like a cliche. There is no such thing as non-Baha'i Sangisaris. That entire village of people, all 46 families from Sangisar are Baha'is. Even if they conceal the fact, their loyalties is to this cult and has been since the beginning of the last century. And so what we're beginning to understand is that his father, for purposes of business and to make money outside of outside of the context of that area of Semnan, made a pro forma conversion to Islam, and this is where the story begins. So, in essence, Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād and Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād's entire family are actually Baha'i converts to Islam, and we say this in quotation marks because all throughout that period of his presidency, and especially leading up to 2009, the manner in which the presidency of Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād destabilized Iran and then brought that country to the verge of civil war is quite telling, because simultaneously to that we also know that the Green movement itself was heavily infiltrated by Baha'is at the same time, and this tactic of playing all sides, both sides against the middle, is one that the Baha'is have consistently done throughout their entire history.
So, Mr. Azal, before going on any further, back into the point you just raised, according to some of the historians you named, some of them, are probing and speculating that the main motive and the main reason of that bizarre act of purging the Baha'i evidence probably was because the financial government agencies in Pahlavi stripped the Baha'i organization of its tax exemption.
Yeah.
Which drew the most attention, from the Baha'is. And they didn't want it to be unfolded, and therefore they set out to purge evidence and destroy anything that could whistle blow.
That was part of it. They were not paying taxes under the Pahlavi regime. And this is quite bizarre. If you are a government person who is working in a taxation office and you learn about the fact that these Baha'is have two trust companies, the Shirkat al-Ahlan and Shirkat al-Omanah, why are you as an organization not paying tax?
These are adversaries, right? These two companies were kind of the Haifan Baha'is adversaries. Is that true?
The Shirkat al-Ahlan and Omanah. No,
yes,
these were the trust companies. They were trust companies. They were banks, private banks.
Okay.
Private banks. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and they've never been deprived of property or injured by any means.
Not that we're aware. Not during the Pahlavi period. After the Pahlavi period, there are all kinds of stories of what happened. We know the real story that Mr. Habīb Sābet pilfered huge amounts of the assets and left Iran, and that he had help from people like Bāhonar and Bāhonar's contacts in doing that. But during the Pahlavi period itself, no. They didn't touch any of the properties, any of the assets, any of this stuff from the Baha'is. And the Baha'is also had their protection from within Savak itself through Parvīz Sābetī, and also through the military intelligence of the Shah's military. There were high-ranking generals, Baha'i generals, within the Shah's military who headed the intelligence directorate of Artash-Shahi, the Shah's military. So this is what I have been pointing at, this internal war. There was an internal war going on within the establishment, within the Pahlavi establishment, beyond the person of Muhammad Reza Pahlavi even himself, between elements of the system of the Pahlavi system and the Baha'is. This element wanted to do things by the book. Everybody else in Iran is paying taxes. All these other companies, individuals, etc. But the Baha'is specifically refused to pay taxes, even though they were making profits, even though they were setting up trust companies, private banks, etc. And even though individual Baha'is, besides Habīb Sābet, were making considerable profits from various businesses during that period. A example of this is the Cosa Nostra figure of Hojjat Yazdani, who became so wealthy at one point that he was tendering to buy out one of the banks in Tehran. And it took the intervention of Amir Abbas Hoveyda during his time as prime minister to stop that from happening. But these people didn't pay any tax.
Mrs. Leila Chamankha, a historian, she told me concerning the collusion, and the notorious deal made between Bāhonar and Habīb Sābet. She believes Bāhonar may well be tricked, lied or threatened. How would you
we don't. I mean, that's speculation. What we do know is that there was collusion. Now, whether Bāhonar was blackmailed, tricked, etc., possibly that's very possible. That's how it happened. But the question remains: how was that possible? What was the entry point? What was the angle in which his blackmailers entered, by which that they could use someone like Bāhonar? The kind of wheeling and dealing that was going on under the Pahlavi era, anything is possible. But what we also do know is that Bāhonar has a significant portion of his extended family who are actually Baha'is. So the question of blackmail then needs to be then more carefully analyzed. If that was the case, who would have had the wherewithal to coerce him? What did they have to coerce him, and blackmail him with? But yeah, anything is possible. I mean, it's possible that this was going on. Nevertheless,
Okay.
this is what happened. Yeah.
And back to the point,
Yeah.
Mr. Azal, after the execution of the Second National Spiritual Assembly of Iran, as you know, the main body of the Baha'i administration, the Universal House of Justice, attempted to stop it. And then a series of, Freedom of Information Act requests, to gain access to governments, supposedly false files and evidence. But the process, proved slow and inefficient. Then the leadership, the Baha'i leadership, soon determined more extreme measures. They believe they should take extreme measures, to truly change the Baha'is' reputation, within the other countries, and the eyes of other spectators.
Well, this is, I've said this for years now, that the biggest beneficiary of the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic of Iran have been the Baha'is. That without what happened in Iran, without the regime, without Khomeini, without all of that,
because you said
there would be no, the media and international spotlight that fell on the Baha'is almost immediately from 1979 forward has been unabated. They have milked this to its utmost from the very first day, and the regime itself has made some very gross miscalculations. I will say this: they have misstepped and miscalculated and taken stupid actions time and time again that has been fed this media frenzy in the West, what have you. But all in all, without the IRI, the Baha'is would be nowhere, really right now. Because during the 1970s, especially, when you had a whole cadre of scholars coming up and starting to question some of the leading narratives of Baha'ism, Baha'ism was basically beginning to shrink into insignificance at that point. And because of the internal inquiry and the questions that were coming up, without another focal point to stop that process, if the Islamic Revolution had not happened in Iran, the 1980s would have been 1990s would have been the final 2 decades of the influence of this organization on an international level. It would have been relegated to a footnote to history by that point.
That's right. And I believe, as far as I'm concerned, Iran, particularly, the government of Islamic Republic, isn't the only government targeted by the Baha'is.
No, of course not. They have targeted, governments such as Egypt. They did this during the Mubarak regime. Basically, we're trying to strong arm the judiciary in Egypt to give them a national recognition in law. And just remember,
you mean dozens of Baha'i administration kept, unflattering, on the organization. They kept intact and hidden. Is that what you mean, particularly in the Arabic countries?
Well, let's look at this from a case-by-case basis. There is Egypt, okay? There's Egypt of the Mubarak period. The Egypt of the Mubarak period, especially during the last decade before the Arab Spring, there were several public cases that the Baha'is were involved with, where they got Western human rights organizations involved because the Egyptian judiciary refused to grant a formal recognition to this cult within its country. And they had every right to do that, for various reasons. But the Baha'is pressed, they mobilized all kinds of consensus within this Western human rights regime, and then basically pushed the Egyptian government itself to basically grant some kind of a recognition to these people. And this was 1 or 2 years. It concluded 1 or 2 years before the Arab Spring, the late part of the last decade. But then, before this, we had been learning consistently that there is a sizable Baha'i presence within Saudi Arabia. and that this sizable Baha'i presence in Saudi Arabia has been established for a very long time, as far back as probably the 1950s, and that these people do business with the Saudi royal family, and that there are solid connections between Baha'is who are known to the regime in Saudi Arabia as being Baha'is. And also in the United Arab Emirates, this is the case, as well as Qatar is also the case. So that these people have kind of spread themselves out in these Gulf countries. They are doing business there. They have massive investments in these Gulf countries and are also coddling up to the ruling classes and the ruling families and the political establishments of these Gulf countries.
That's true. And concerning Iran again, Mr. Azal, do you agree that the bold act of quote-unquote perpetual resistance, and opposition as an order issued by Ruhiya Khanum herself resulted in at least 30 cases of murders, through which the Baha'is drew the most attention they needed at the time?
Yeah, and definitely in Iran, this was the case. Let's not forget that after the 1953 coup d'etat in 1954, as the government of Iran was in the process of concluding a 20-year deal with some of these Western oil companies over access to Iran's petroleum, that it was during this time that the Shah, the same Mohammad Javād-Bāhonar that was beholden literally to Habīb Sābet, unleashed individuals such as Falsafī on the radio, and these Islamists went crazy and diverted most of the public's attention to the Baha'is, went and attacked the Tehrān Ḥaẓirat'ul-Quds, the Tehrān Bahāʿī Center, and attacked the House of the Bab in Shiraz, etc. This was all meant to divert attention from the wheeling and dealing of the Iranian government itself with the oil companies. But this gave a spotlight at the time to the Baha'i community of Iran on the international level. And so these violent swan songs were being played at the time in the international press about the plight of the Baha'i community. At the very same time that Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is granting the Pepsi Cola franchise to Habīb Sābet, granting subsequently the radio television franchise. Habīb Sābet at that time is the national he's the Secretary General of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Iran. So it was through such smoke screening, that the regime of Pahlavi on the one hand, and these Baha'i mafia figures such as Habīb Sābet on the other, were using the plight of their own community and the attack upon their own community by these forces such as Falsafī, Hojjat'ul-Islām Falsafī, a complete moron from the point of view of history. I mean,
exactly.
Nevertheless,
he was anti-Mossadegh, right?
He was anti-Mossadegh. He at one point even turned against Kashani, even though Kashani turned against Mossadegh. Falsafī is like the I call him the Shaban bi Mukh of the Hausa.
Yes, a kind of
yeah,
right. And Mr. Azal, durability, in the best sense of the term, is the ability of an organization, to remain functional without requiring excessive, maintenance or repair when faced with challenges of operation over its design lifetime. There are several measures of durability in use, including, years of life, a number of operational cycles. But this quote-unquote holy durability exercised by the Baha'i, suggested by Ruhiya Maxwell, cost the Baha'i community of Iran a great deal.
Maybe the Baha'i community of Iran on the ground, but it was an investment that paid off mighty dividends outside of Iran. and also inside Iran for the Baha'i Mafia itself. Outside of Iran, in terms of the public exposure and the media coverage that the Baha'is got, and also so that this narrative was already being established within the mid-1950s itself about the persecution of the Baha'is of Iran.
Mr. Azal, so it comes concerning what you said. There is an eyebrow-raising, problem with this. I asked you once, and again I want to ask you that question again. The Second National Spiritual Assembly has allegedly never been succeeded by a third one. Mm-hmm. But you said we have reliable evidence that the Second National Assembly actually was succeeded by the third one immediately afterwards.
Yes. Underground.
This is what you please talk about it a little bit?
Well, the undertaking that the Baha'i community had made to the regime in not recomposing itself on that level of a structure of an administrative body. This was only a verbal undertaking because from the anecdotal evidence that has come back to us is that there was a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th National Spiritual Assembly of Iran. But that they had taken their actions quite clandestinely underground, and that essentially, all public activities basically ceased, and that even the majority of the Iranian Baha'i community in Iran itself was not aware of the existence of this body. Now,
members were acting anonymous, right?
Yeah, they were acting anonymously, a lot of cloak and dagger stuff, but yet, during the very early years of the presidency of Mohammad Khatami, after all of this is beginning in 1997, we begin to see the reemergence of this body under the name Ma'arif Baha'i. And this Ma'arif is the organization that subsequently became renamed as the Hayat-i-Yārān. And from about 1998 all the way to the arrest of these people in 2005, the narratives that were coming, the stories that were coming out of Iran about the kind of corruption that these people are involved with was unbelievable. But what they've managed to do during that brief period where their activities came out into the open again was that they erected a literal dictatorship over what remained of the Baha'i community of Iran. That was absolute. That was, it was like a reinforced dictatorship over the dictatorship that Iranians were living in. And there was corruption and lots of cover-ups and these individuals of this Hayat-i-Yārān, one of whom, especially Mr. Khanjani, was using that opportunity for profiteering, and especially in land speculation in the northern provinces of Iran, especially Mazandaran.
You said the ground for his detainment was totally different, to the 61. His detention and what the court prosecution documents show was not over the. They didn't charge him. They did make indictments similar to the other individuals, but primarily what the judiciary and what the officials were interested in was his economic corruption, because he was engaging in massive land speculations with business partners that were not even in Iran. Individuals who were transferring funds from all over the world in these very, very shoddy and extremely corrupt land deals in Mazandaran province and also parts of Khorasan, where they were just buying massive parcels of property without having the right to do so. And some of these shadowy partners, I have been told this, I've never seen evidence of it, but I have been told that some of these business partners of Mr. Khanjani were actually Israelis. I see, that's true. And Mr. Azal, here comes another important question. This body of Baha'i administration, usually addressed as Yārān Iran, 7 members, they were pressed with charges. Okay. They were pressed with charges of attempt against national security. And all seven members taken together were sentenced to life imprisonment.
Yeah.
So why in the world the government of Hassan Rouhani grant them clemency?
That is the question. That is a question that a lot of people are asking, and the only conclusion is that this is a political reason, and
isn't
that
an act of stupidity?
it's it is. I mean, Hassan Rouhani as the president is one thing, but there's also the judiciary. The judiciary was in control of this case, and for the judiciary of the Islamic Republic to accede to this is actually is capitulation to the demands of the forces outside of Iran, because the case that they built against these individuals, okay, and I have seen parts of this case, was rock solid, and on issues of espionage, which these people were convicted on, and they didn't win their appeal, they lost their appeal. You don't just suddenly after 10 years decide, okay, you people have served enough time, so we're going to let you go. And that's what they
I'm
did.
saying, Mr. Azal, in the first official sentence, they were all sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
But 10 years afterwards, halfway through, they were, they were given clemency. That's
I began.
I cannot make the head and tail of that.
The fissures of all of this began to appear when we started hearing around after the election of Irani in 2013, when we began hearing about these people, several of these people getting getting home visitation rights. So they would leave the prison complex during the weekends and go home, and they were with their families. And I found this bizarre. If you have people who have been convicted and sentenced to a maximum security conviction, you don't give these people home visitations unless you're admitting that the entire conviction was bogus to begin with, and that's a different discussion. But the Islamic Republic of Iran and its judiciary has not formally admitted that the entire case was bogus. See, this is the anomaly that we're dealing with. The system in Iran has not admitted, made no admission whatsoever, whether by evidence or even by declaration, that the case that they had against these seven individuals was wrong. They have not made that assertion.
That's true. As you know, this clemency was ensued after by another incident that brought about brouhaha. I mean,
yes,
Hāshemī Rafsanjānī paying a visit to his several members of this IRIN Iran, particularly Mohammad Javād-Bāhonar, Habīb Sābet, her cellmates, as she described, here and then. What's going on? Don't you think that there might be some sort of loose collusion between Hāshemī Rafsanjānī's family and the Keyvān Yaḥyāʿī?
I don't think there is a possibility. I think this is an actuality. And as Hāshemī Rafsanjānī got more and more wealthy, I think these contacts and connections between him and this hidden Baha'i economic mafia got more and more intimate, to the point that in 2016, Farzah Hashemi can without any fear whatsoever of repercussions, will go to North Tehran, to the house of this Mohammad Sābet, and take a selfie with these people with a picture of Abdu'l-Baha hanging in the background.
Hang on the wall.
Yeah.
Without any repercussions, without any cause, So could we put it this way, that Iran actually somehow, have gotten away with what they did?
Yes, I believe that the Rouhani government and the current judiciary that they seem to have a lot of influence over have allowed these people to get away with it. Literally, with espionage.
why should let themselves be double-crossed in such an idiot manner? That's very idiotic. it's very idiotic. It's unbelievable.
Well, this also tells you that, okay, contrary. See, this is the thing a lot of people don't understand about Iran. Iran's power structure is not a monolithic power structure. There were attempts to make it that way, but it failed, and now it is completely scattered. So, people look at the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are only one power center to themselves. Then there is the presidency, then there is the judiciary, and then beyond the government itself, there are the various economic and financial interests in Iran that, arguably have become far more powerful than the state itself in these last few years, especially. Now, some of the information I get from my contacts in Iran, they all say that the entire building industry in Tehran itself, so like cement works, heavy equipment, brick manufacturing, all of these various industries that are related to the building industries are uniformly controlled by Baha'is and owned outright by them. So that tells you that a significant element of a local economy of the capital city of Tehran itself is already controlled by these people. And, if you are trying to take over a society, you don't take over a society from the government. You take the society over from the level of the economy. This is the neoliberal model that many people have written about. This is how you hijack a society, and you don't necessarily need to even formally overthrow a system, in order to take it over. You can have the facade of all of that in place, and continue to do your thing and reap your benefits, have your protection and whatnot. Because the kind of monies that have been made in Iran, and I have seen this with my own eyes, and I wouldn't have believed it unless I saw it with my own eyes, is obscene. That the kind of wealth that has been made under a system that claims to be fighting for the dispossessed of the earth. The Mustasavina fil ard, which was the clarion call of the Ayatollah Khomeini during the Islamic Revolution, is just a cliche now because of the kind of wealth that exists, the obscene wealth and the kind of class conflict that is been exacerbated in Iran. And this has nothing to do with the system itself. It has nothing to do with the regime. It has to do with these economic forces, a significant portion of which are the Baha'is.
Mr. Azal, I've heard something from some of the passive Baha'i themselves, wondering if you have ever heard anything about that. They told me immediately afterward the detention of Yaran Iran, these 7 members of the Baha'i, the then current administration of the Baha'i, most of this passive Baha'i started rejoicing, celebrating, and revealing.
I have heard the same. I've gotten the exact same feedback from many of these people, because, like I said, the Hayat-i-Yārān had overlaid a mind-boggling dictatorship over the entire Iranian Baha'i community within Iran during the entire period of its activities. So in essence, the arrest of these individuals and the breakup of the Hayat-i-Yārān for the period was a period of respite, a period in which some of these lay Baha'is could breathe once again. But simultaneously to their arrest, you had the activities of the Iranian Baha'i community literally being taken over by the International Teaching Center, the counselors in Haifa. And so then they were starting to direct, what should go on in Iran. And this is the period where you see Baha'is going onto the university campuses and trying to recruit people using the Ruhi method, holding Ruhi Institute classes at Tehran University campus classrooms, etc.
Because I've heard the dissident Baha'is, those who stated, their objections outright, were called upon immediately by these people, to provide an account for their statements in a very mafia-esque manner. I've heard that at least from 2 Baha'is, 2 Baha'is who who were seemingly fed up and tired and sick of these interrogations. One of them told me, the interrogation exercised by Iran was far worse than what's the case with, the information and intelligence.
Yeah, with the Ayatollahs. Yeah, with the Ayatollahs. Yes, and this is exactly the same kind of feedback I was getting. That the kind of hyper-authoritarianism that the Iran implemented and the methods of psychological abuse and warfare that they unleashed on other Baha'is in Iran at the time was far more effective and far more penetrating than anything that even the regime itself in Iran at the time was doing to society at large, and the Baha'is particularly. And I found that absolutely mind-boggling, that how is that even possible to do? And furthermore, how is that possible to continue for such a length of time without the system in Iran stepping in and doing something about it? So, when the system finally stepped in after the election of Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād the first time in 2005, I mean, I couldn't believe that it took them that long before they were willing to step in and actually do anything about it. I was hearing stories there were individuals that used to call me in Australia from Iran, and they would tell me stories about the things that the Iran was doing. For example, they told me, like, the son of one of these members of the Iran was a bit of a ladies' man, and he had impregnated several Iranian Baha'i girls, and basically told their parents to F off. He had been accused of raping a girl and another girl, and her family were up in arms, and that whole issue was basically shunted aside, and these people were threatened with excommunication and etc. That all of these sorts of corruptions were going on, and that the children of these individuals were using the position of their parents for personal and also financial gain.
So you mean wandering around, doing whatever they wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, time after time, telephone after telephone from numerous individuals. They would first contact me on the internet. I would check them out. Then we would start to talk. I would check them out over the telephone to see if these people are credible. And then once I was satisfied that they were credible, and I had thoroughly checked them out, then this relationship went on for a long time. Some of these people are still talking to me. And
they have a very efficient and useful means of observance over Baha'is, right? How did it come to pass? How did it come to pass without the aid coming from the government?
That is the question. It is not possible to implement these sorts of systems of intelligence management without the help of governments.
Because to lie, a grid of observation, you need lots of things and apparatus, and they were short. Apparently, the Baha'is or any other groups, per se, were short of this apparatus. But suddenly you see they can observe, they can take every single body of, the community of the Baha'is in Iran under scrutiny. They could call upon anybody they want, and the responsibility, is out of the question. To whom or to what their allegiance lies with.
And this is the thing. I mean, you're dealing with the chaos of the bazaar, okay? And there is wheeling and dealing on every side, but these people are master wheelers and dealers. And you never know in that kind of situation whose loyalty is with who. And this is also, one of the complaints that many people have about Iran itself, that the culture is, it breeds that kind of environment, that kind of person. But with the Baha'is themselves, that they can manage to impose these kinds of ad hoc systems within a country that technically prescribes them and are effective in keeping themselves going up to a period, make a lot of money, and do all that kind of stuff in the process, is indicative of the fact that you are dealing not just with an organization that claims a religion or a religious ideology, but you're actually also dealing with foreign governments simultaneously. I mean, I've had one guy, this is a friend of mine in Qom, who, I've had these sorts of conversations with him, and he's always said that it is a joke, amongst some people in Iran, that if you want a under-the-table contact with a foreign government, that you go and seek out the Baha'is. And this is very interesting, that the Baha'is that are even seen by the system in Iran itself as a sort of go-between for themselves to foreign governments, the Israelis, the Americans, the Brits, and what have you. And so, all of this, when we put this all together, this basically says that the human rights narrative that the Baha'is have been pushing in the West since the late 1970s and early 1980s is just a facade. This is, yes, there are average lay Baha'is who are harassed. There are average lay Baha'is who have been in the firing line. We acknowledge all of that. What has happened to some of these people are in fact human rights violations, very serious ones at that too. Nevertheless, by and large, the entire human rights narrative that the Baha'is have pushed in the West is an exaggerated narrative, and in the face of situations where you have a blatant case that in 2016 you have the daughter of Hāshemī Rafsanjānī taking a selfie with one of these people in North Tehran.
Exactly.
This tells you everything that you need to know, that there is a significant element of that regime on the financial level and also within the system itself that are playing ball with them.
So is the case with people like Muhammad Nurizad or
Yes.
Moḥsen Makhmalbāf.
Yeah.
How would you get on with these people?
I would not get on with them at all. I mean, Makhmalbāf sold his soul to the devil, literally. I mean, this guy is a pathetic fool, in my opinion. Despite the glowing studies of Hamid Rashi about this guy.
Is that true that he confiscated, Mehdi Mīsāqi's properties?
I don't know. I mean, there are some people that claim that he was the beneficiary of Mehdi Mīsāqi's property and assets after the revolution.
Later on, he made a documentary about Baha'is, and some sources even claim that he converted to Baha'ism.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I've heard that. The one thing that is for certain about the Green movement, and this is the reason why I completely distance myself from these people, because throughout the first half of 2009, or the second half of 2009, from June 2009 to the end of 2009, I actually was quite close to some of these people on the internet. But after December of 2009 especially, I realized that I was actually dealing with the Baha'i administration, that I was dealing with a infiltrated political movement. And this became more and more glaring, to the point where you would go to rallies, where is my vote rallies in places like Brisbane or Sydney in Australia, and you would see hundreds of Baha'is that you hadn't seen for years. And these are the same people that for years have been claimed that we're a non-political organization, that we are non-political, we don't involve in partisan politics, but yet you were having them show up at these pro-green rallies in foreign capitals outside of Iran. And within Iran itself, the claim that the regime has made is actually true, that there was a significant Baha'i participation in propelling the radicalization of this movement, and the radicalization of this movement beyond, I think, even what Mir Hossein Mousavi and his friend wanted to happen, and these people became victims to the excesses that, number one, the Baha'is and also the MEK were pushing through this movement. I witnessed this myself in Australia. I saw it on message boards. I saw it in blatant form on sites such as Iranian.com and so on and so forth. So the accusation that the regime has made that the Greens infiltrated is correct. And then we see examples such as Makhmalbāf. Then we see
Mr. Azal, Makhmalbāf side, there's certain one, Mr. Moḥsen Sazgara.
Mr. Moḥsen Sazgara, the founder of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the founder of the Sipahi Pastaran,
and now an apologist for the Baha'i administration.
And now an apologist, an unashamed apologist for the Baha'i administration. Akbar Ganji, of course, was a dissident, but he was also a mid-level IRGC person. He's also beating his chest for these people these days as well.
Yes, he beating his chest to the effect that Mr. Azal, to the effect that he wrote an article against Dr. Shariati,
Yes, I know.
Fingering and highlighting his intimidation toward, the Baha'is, through his writings and speeches. And that was very bizarre to me.
Well, this is what,
makes sense.
That all of these dissidents that have, other than probably Abdul Karim Soroush, the rest of them, all of these dissidents to the regime in Iran, particularly those of them who have been associated with the Green movement in 2009, Moḥsen Makhmalbāf, Hamid Dawashi, Yasser Mirdamadi, Hossein Kamali, and on it goes. These names,
they were Baha'i.
Mrs. Sotoudeh, all of these people have closely allied themselves with the Baha'i organization. The Baha'i organization has also gone out of its way to accommodate these people, which tells you, that number one, that this Green movement, as the regime claims, has been infiltrated by the Baha'is. But number two, there's another even more worrying element to this, because what we know about Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād and his own Baha'i past, and also the very sketchy and shadowy career of his right-hand man, Rahim Masha'i, this tells me that whole event of 2009 was the Baha'is playing all sides, just like they did in 1978 and 79, and just like they have been doing throughout the entire history, the modern history of Iran since the time of Reza Pahlavi. They are playing all sides. They are playing both the antagonists and the protagonists simultaneously. So these green intellectuals or malcontents of the system in Iran who want to overthrow it and replace it with a secular democracy, the Baha'is are there. But they're also there with the hardliners, like Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād.
So yes, I agree, but I can't figure out the benefit or advantage that these people will get. The ad hoc, apologetic, pseudo-intellectual who are all for Baha'i.
Well, they actually get a lot of advantage from that, and it's also a policy of their administration of seeking out what they call people of prominence. These are directives that have come from the USJ itself, going on decades. I mean, to hear about this back in the 1980s. So it is a great advantage because they get to claim celebrities and they get to claim people of prominence. See, look at these people; they're on our side. What are our critics saying? Besides our critics within Iran, within the system in Iran, look at these, stupid critics of ours like Waḥīd Azal and all the rest of it. What are they saying? Look at these Greens; they're with us. They understand what we're saying. That is the benefit to these people. That is the benefit. But these people themselves, people like Makhmalbāf, this guy is a sellout. This guy has no integrity. He has no spine. He has sold his soul to the devil himself. And even someone like Hamid Dawashi, who was a Google-eyed, a groupie of Moḥsen Makhmalbāf, who wrote 3 books about the man. At the end, after that movie came out, I think it was called The Iranian Taboo or whatever it is. After that movie came out, even Hamid Dawashi could no longer stomach the behavior and activities of Makhmalbāf and had to distance himself from Makhmalbāf.
Iranian Taboo, by the way, Iranian Taboo was directed by Reza Lamezadeh.
Yes, that's right. The movie, the one that Makhmalbāf was even stupider than that. The Gardener, The Gardener.
But that was made by that one, which is very suspicious.
But see, this is the thing. The question then becomes: what kind of financial benefits is Moḥsen Makhmalbāf? What kind of perks is Moḥsen Makhmalbāf getting from this sort of thing? And
because I'm sorry, infiltrating the government, can prove so tedious.
They don't want to see. This is the thing. You don't want to you don't want to infiltrate one thing. If you're trying to take over a society, you infiltrate it from multiple angles. You've infiltrated from one level of the government, then you infiltrated from another level of a government, then you infiltrated from the level of the opposition, all of the various opposition. Look at how cozy the Mujahideen Khalq these days are with the Baha'is themselves. Once upon a time, I never forget this, the Mujahideen Khalq were towing the party line, claiming that if they ever took power in Iran, and one of the first things that they would do is to eliminate all the Baha'is in Iran. This was back in the 1980s, even after they had become antagonistic to the IRI. Now they're all chummy with Baha'is. Which politics obviously makes very strange bedfellows. But what this shows is that the pull and the influence of the Baha'i organization has managed to find its way, direct itself into every nook and cranny of the Iranian political political landscape. And this is very dangerous. This is extremely dangerous situation.
It is very, disgrace that the Baha'i community of Iran, allegedly, expedited the process by introducing more, criminal elements of the green movements, to the government of Iran. Several agents,
because
Bahaism reportedly stole documents they should not have had access to through illegal means.
Because what
mysterious methods include, forging official credentials, and even, committing burglary. It's unbelievable. What's going on there?
But this is typical criminality. It's like them, destroying tomb heads of some Baha'i cemeteries and then claiming that the regime did it. These sorts of examples are so numerous that what happened in Iran in 2009 is only one example in a multitude. But what is concerning is that you have, number one, what this is doing is making any real opposition, any genuine democratic opposition to the Islamic Republic even more impossible by the day. So it is leaving only two options. You either back the regime itself, or you have no other option but to back these foreign and Baha'i infiltrated pseudo-opposition groups and pseudo-opposition individuals. All of them, as far as I'm concerned, are traitors. And what this does to the process of establishing a democratic polity for Iran, the vision of Mossadegh, the vision of the constitutional revolution, makes it that much more remote and that much more inaccessible, even if the Americans were to attack Iran tomorrow. And this is very worrying. Anybody who is a real political activist, anybody who is genuine about wanting to bring a real democratic polity to Iran, who wants to do away with the authoritarianism of the current system, needs to step back and take their distance from at the very beginning from these sorts of groups. Whether it be the Greens, forget about the MEK, whatever. I mean, those guys are completely lost. But from the Greens especially,
the MEK completely evaporated. But how is it possible that the community of Iranian Baha'is perpetually, fixed its, impressive financial muscle by engaging in outright, activities to shift the government's opinion
because of the perennial disease that plagues Iran, corruption. Right?
That's right.
The thing that this revolution in 1979 was supposed to get rid of, that was supposed to engineer out of the Iranian psyche, it fundamentally has failed in doing. And that is how the system in Iran makes itself weak. It doesn't make, it's one thing to talk about the imperialist forces. All of this is true. It's one thing to talk about the pressures of the sanctions on Iran. But, the problem with Iran on the basic macro level is an existential problem. It's a social psychological problem, and that is the endemic corruption that is allowed within the culture. It's the culture of bakshish. It's the culture of corrupt officials. It's the culture of the ability to buy off officialdom in Iran. And it is through this means.
So you believe they turn a blind eye.
Not only by eye, they take the cash and they give these people what they want. Absolutely. And when you're living in a situation where you have international sanctions on your economy, right?
And
it's that much more easier to do these things.
Additionally, after that heated dispute between Irfan Sābetī and Sadri's brothers, who fell from prominence, two brothers, against the odds, they fell from prominence, as time went by. At the time, I'm not sure if you remember, Irfan Sābetī addressed, very clearly an existing problem that was uncover potential vulnerabilities inside the community of Iranian Baha'is. Because according to Irfan Sābetī, not every single Iranian Baha'i is a dedicated Baha'i.
Yes.
Is that true?
Of course.
So it's
just like in the same manner that not everybody who pretends to be a Hezbollah in Iran is actually one. In the same way.
And exactly. And after that, the Baha'is started, establishing and running a website calling ASU,
yes.
on the internet, which I believe aim to feed the Baha'is with information, collected, selected, and filtered by the Baha'i administrations, to fill the gaps, because most of the Iranian Baha'is are quite illiterate, they're left illiterate, one way or another, and they are not aware of what's going on around the world. And, with low education, you cannot expect, a very powerful administration. Therefore, I believe these websites and the like are compensating, for this shortage, right?
Well, it's also for purposes of propaganda. Look, the Baha'i administration does not need rank and file people in Iran, okay? It keeps them around, but it doesn't really need them, okay? What the Baha'i administration, what the Baha'i mafia, especially that is behind the Baha'i administration needs, is people that it can work with, right? It is people who have the ability to operate and function within a cutthroat environment, corporate or otherwise, whether it be in Iran or elsewhere. It is people who could sit down at a table and make deals, whether over the table or under the table. These sorts of sites and these sitage, such as ASU and all the plethora of the other ones that these Baha'is have put up, is for the benefit of the rank and file. And it takes minimal amount of investment to put these websites up. These people have loaded pockets, they have deep pockets, so they can put, hundreds, if not thousands of these sorts of websites online. But it's to keep the rank and file quiet more than anything else. It's to keep
one of the security people stated, the crime committed by the Baha'i administration is of a specific nature, of breadth and scope, previously unheard of. No building, no office, desk or file, was safe from their snooping and prying. No individual or organization was free from their despicable, conspirational minds. It's so it's been calculated. It couldn't happen, one night, overnight. It couldn't rise, as a brainstorming process, in the UHJ, for a year or half a year.
No, this has been going on. They have built on existing infrastructure, whether this was a virtual infrastructure or otherwise. And this is what I'm saying, that these relationships and these networks and these systems have existed from even before the 1978-1979 revolution. This is how they managed to do what they're doing in Iran today, despite the various periods of hiatuses or backlashes and whatnot. But one thing, and I think maybe they have gotten pointers by the Mossad in Israel or whatnot, but the fact of the matter is that the Baha'is have managed, the Baha'i cadre, the real movers and shakers, have managed to read the Islamic Republic of Iran, and especially certain elements of its leadership, correctly. And this is how they've managed to infiltrate the system. They know they know which buttons to push. They know who to buy, who to pay off, what kind of pressures on who to put, who to befriend, who to keep at a distance, and so on.
I want to point out, to the court that convicted all 7 members of IRIN Iran on many charges, including, obstruction of justice, and theft of government property. As we just talked, they received, lifetime in prison, but the court later, reduced the sentence.
Commuted their sentences
to 10 years, and this all happened despite the chief prosecutor, provided solid evidence, to charge these people. It's unbelievable,
that he was overruled. The chief prosecutor himself was overruled in this case. And usually the chief prosecutor is not only the prosecutor for the judiciary. The rumor is that these chief prosecutors in high-profile espionage cases such as this are firmly, they're almost lawyers of the intelligence establishment as a whole, the national security establishment of Iran. And that this individual was overruled, and that ultimately they commuted this sentence, and then once that 10-year period reached its marks, they released these individuals. This is very telling.
So can we come to this conclusion that the Baha'is reportedly, continued to keep pressure, on the Iranian government by hiring perhaps private investigators and obtaining, leaked documents?
I think that is
leverages on the chief prosecutors.
I think that is the minimal of it. I think that's the bottom, the bottom line. That is going on. I think it goes even far beyond even that. It even stretches into the area that there are existing business relationships between these Baha'is and elite members of various factions of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I believe this is definitely the case with some of Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād's faction. There's no question about it in my mind. It's the fact of the matter is that this system has made itself corrupt. It didn't keep its promises. It didn't make water and electricity and and the public transportation free as was promised by Ayātollāh Khomeini. And so it gave up because of all the international pressures, because of all the sanctions. It seems to have, during the presidency of Hāshemī Rafsanjānī, it basically gave up on its revolutionary ideals. And, it's only now about keeping itself in power. But when you are trying to, that's all you care about, you are quite amenable to making deals with the devil himself. And this is what these people are doing. And they're allowing, through that kind of myopia, that kind of blindness that is created when you're trying to cling to power by any means necessary, you allow your worst enemies, or people who have claimed to be your worst enemies, to come into your house and do whatever they want with you. And this is exactly what's happened in Iran today, where you have a significant portion of the economy of this capital city in the hands of the Baha'is. They control the building industry. When you control the building industry, you are controlling a significant element of the national economy.
That's true. And my final question, Mr. Azal, the Baha'is claimed that they've long dismantled and dissolved, their organization in Iran, as a result of intimidation.
That's complete nonsense.
Induced by the government. But, in the end, we know that the original goals were indeed met,
Yes.
Do you think, this ad hoc administration body of the Baha'is, usually addressed as Yaran Iran, still going on, still active?
There may be another body that is, I have actually heard this from two people now, that there was a successor organization to the Yaran. That while these several individuals were taken to prison, that there was a successor organization. They called itself something else completely, but the Baha'is were not left completely to their own devices. Look, there's also inferential evidence to that effect of the kind of organization, in the sense of people organized in their own communal activities, that Mr. Hassan Ershad has been reporting in his various podcasts online for the last 2-3 years. That there is activities, and if there's activities, these Baha'is do not do anything outside of the context and the walls of some kind of an organizational apparatus. So there's no question that after these 7 individuals were arrested, that there was a successor organization. And like I mentioned, much of these activities of the Iranian Baha'i community were being directed, directly from the ITC, from the International Teaching Center. So the counselors in Haifa were directing the Baha'i organization, the ad hoc and clandestine Baha'i organization in Iran, in its activities throughout that country.
And, I believe there exist so many pressing stories, that remain to be told, from your enormous archive about how the Baha'i administration, are attempting to manipulate and control even online discourse. With the extreme tactics of deception, reputation destruction.
Absolutely.
It's time to tell a chunk of that story.
Sure.
Would you please complete with the relevant?
Where do we begin? A most recent example is this ex-Baha'i subreddit on Reddit, where the chief moderator of this place is, without any shadow of a doubt, into a moral certainty, on the payroll of the Baha'i Internet Agency, because there's this ID that shows up, which is actually Scott Hakala, and everybody knows that. And this guy is always cut slack by this moderator, and anybody who complains about the activities of this this ID is immediately punished by this Salman Wilson, who is the moderator, the chief moderator of this ex-Baha'i on Reddit. And this sort of thing has been going on for years. Eric Stetson, I have instanced Eric Stetson, who used to head the whole ex-Baha'i internet list culture, is one of the most dubious individuals who ever stepped forth into that whole Baha'i cyberspace culture. I have numerous questions about this guy and some of the people around him, and the list goes on. This is the thing. The Baha'i discourse on the internet, whether pro or con, is controlled discourse. And anyone who is in genuine opposition to this discourse will either be marginalized or viciously attacked online, as I have been so many different times. It's becomes second nature to me about what these people are going to do.
And they achieve their goals, by, for instance, monitoring of YouTube and, activity.
It was this particular faction within Iran itself, for example, that pulled me off of Press TV. And they did it in a very uncanny way, although I knew the whole time who were the people actually lobbying to get me off of Press TV, and to basically initiate a massive smear campaign against me, to pull me off of Press TV, which is fine, because Press TV has indeed made itself into a joke, given some of the guests that it keeps inviting to the show, who have very far right and white supremacist backgrounds, and dubious guests that they're inviting. Nevertheless, the smear campaign came from that specific faction allied with Maḥmoud Aḥmadīnejād. I know this for a fact. And these people, some of these people who are active on the internet, they have direct connections to the Baha'i organization. They themselves have come out publicly saying so. And even if what they're saying is not completely credible, well, they are associated with people who are card-carrying members of the Baha'i organization, and online are definitely members of the Baha'i Internet Agency. So discord, opposition activities to these people is controlled. They are playing literally all sides, just like they're playing the hardliners in Iran, and just like they played the Greens and the moderates in Iran. They are infiltrating from all sides.
Let me tell you something. I can connect the dots, and extrapolated a theory out of at least 10 individual stories that the Baha'is actually use dirty tactics, such as what they call honey traps.
Yes.
To lure people into compromising situation, via sexual,
Yeah, this is classic.
Infatuation and destructive viruses. It's very dirty, isn't it?
They do it. They have done this sort of thing. Unfortunately, I can read these things before they even, come to that point. And this sort of tactic has never ever worked on me. But I have heard of individuals who have found themselves in compromising positions of that nature. So it is definitely real.
I know, but here I want to focus, and elaborate on the overarching point revealed by you yourself, namely that the Baha'i administration has been attempting to control, infiltrate, manipulate, and warp online discourse. And in doing so, they've been compromising the integrity of the internet itself.
Yes, they have, with the search engine optimization that Google allows. So this is an area that my wife worked in as an IT techie, and we found tomes and tomes and tomes and thousands of pages and bytes of evidence that this the amount of search optimization the Baha'is were doing on Google especially, but also other search engines, was on a massive level. And this kind of search optimization is one that only big corporations and big companies and what have you, and governments have access to. But in their own regard, they have done this.
Particularly, for instance, about it's the case with the Bionic.
They did it with the Bionic.com. They relegated it. The webmaster of Bionic.com is a very specialized techie person themselves, and where they get stumped, they always have people around them who can help them. But the amount of investment that the Baha'is made to try to get the Bionic.com offline or out of people's notice and attention is unbelievable.
Yes, it's because they strived literally, to divert the attention from the religion of Bayan. Using the psychological techniques to manipulate online, offline discourse and activism to generate outcomes. Considers desirable to see how extremist, these people are.
Well, but just remember, remember.
Sorry.
Just remember. Hold on. Remember, these tactics are tactics of intelligence agencies. Just remember this.
That's right. False flag operations or making fake victims.
Misinformation,
negative information on various forums, in internet, and they were about to wipe out the Bionic.com. Of course, they didn't succeed, but they were close enough.
There was so many hacks of this site in the first couple of years. Then they realized that we could get over the hacks. And once Google Corporation allowed the search optimization, when the independent actors can come in and optimize these search listings, the Baha'is got into the act as of, I would say, probably around 2004 on a mass level. And they were doing this also before Wikipedia. The minute Wikipedia came out, the Baha'is, as a stampede, went into and started putting up their own articles and pushing their own narratives on these various entries on Wikipedia, and on it goes, and to the point, and this was a joke, in most English language articles with a religious with any kind of religious content, somewhere on this page you will find the Baha'is have put their stamp on this piece, especially in the Islam section.
Exactly. Critically, the targets, quote-unquote targets, for this deceit and, reputation and destruction extend far beyond, some tiny problems, or, tiny differences between, the administration and individuals.
No.
Because, in fact, the discussion of many of, these techniques occurs in the context of using them, in lieu of, traditional law enforcement against people, suspected.
Because in the West, they have managed to successfully market themselves with this smiley face and this very snuggly kind of, family thing. We're the very happy, innocent cult that is being persecuted in Iran, and that kind of marketing has succeeded in the perceptions of Western law enforcement agencies. Not all of them, but most of them.
You remember your talk, in London, right?
Yeah.
You gave a talk at SOAS.
Yep.
Right, and it was very interesting. It was very interesting to see a Baha'i woman, starting a conversation, a kind of, debate with you, at the end of your lecture. What was it all about,
This woman, a partner, had come in obviously to heckle, but the MC of my talk, quickly shut them down, because it was obvious why they were there and what they were trying to do, and it wasn't going to work, and my MC was not going to allow it either. So we quickly got rid of them, or we quickly got rid of them, and that was the end of that.
I believe she was Iranian, right?
She was Iranian. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And I believe we can leave it here.
I would mention one thing. I would mention one last thing.
Yes, and your last word, please.
Is that your friend, I mean, you don't have to mention his name, but this is a very prominent individual in the Iranian community whose father is considered one of the legends of Iranian music. He had gotten into an altercation some time ago with the Baha'i, wherein this Baha'i had told him point blank that we have our own people in the office of the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei.
I see. Wow. Unbelievable.
They have infiltrated that far into the office, maybe not the person of the Supreme Leader, but they have infiltrated into the office itself.
And nobody had, and so far nobody has really, the goals to stand against these people in Iran.
Well,
right?
When you have someone of the caliber of Abdullah Shahbazi going to prison for 18 months because of a book that he wrote in which he exposes some of this stuff in this book, and then recently for him to be basically run out of Iran because of these studies of his, even though Shahbazi was part of the intelligence apparatus of Iran for a long time, and the research element of this is quite telling. It says that the power of this mafia, this Baha'i-connected mafia, or the Baha'i mafia in Iran, is beyond, or is reaching the level of going well beyond the system of the Islamic Republic of Iran itself. And we should leave it on that point.
Exactly, and the broader point is that, these surveillance agencies of the Baha'is, have vested themselves with the power, to deliberately ruin people's reputations and disrupt their online political, activity, even though these people have never been charged with crimes or anything else.
But you do this targeted harassment. Targeted harassment is a classic tactic of organizations such as this, and they do it for the specific reason so that one day they can actually set up their antagonists for something along the line, at the minimum, for either arrest or, if not that, murder, outright murder. And this is where political activists who talk about democracy and human rights, need to be aware that the activities of the Baha'is in smearing their political and ideological opponents in itself constitutes human rights violations. And, if they continue on this track in trying to promote this organization as a victim of human rights in Iran, but yet say nothing about the violations of the human rights of dissidents by this organization in various ways, underhanded and overhanded ways, then, eventually these matters will be brought to the attention of courts, full-blown courts of law, where they will then have to face the same kind of situation that they faced in the 1980s when the German government revoked their recognized religious status in this country. And we should leave it at that.
That's right. Okay, yeah. Mr. Azal, thank you very much indeed, for participating in this episode. And we'll be looking forward to making another episode on this issue pretty soon. I say again, what happened to you, your wife, is a tragedy that deserves to be scrutinized, and hope you'll get, satisfying results.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm grateful. Have a good day.